Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel for another 2026 election preview, and today we are looking at the North East. Now, you may have seen, you may not have seen, because I released a video on Friday night after the by-election roundup video, quite late on, about 10:30 I think it was, on Friday evening, so a bit later than I normally do. It didn't get as many views for that reason, but I did do a video reacting to the news that unfortunately once again we are facing the cancellation of elections in England. Look, I think this is a travesty. I encourage you to go and check out the video that I recorded the other day. I'll leave a link to it for you. So I'm not going to get into that here. Just suffice to say that I think it's a disgrace. But I'm happy to say none of the councils here up in the North East that we're looking at in this video are subject to these cancellations as it stands. But I don't see that happening either. There's no local government reorganisation going on up here, so the flimsy excuse that they're using doesn't apply to these councils. And look, I'm sure these are elections that Labour would absolutely love to cancel because they are really up against it. As you can see on the screen, a lot of red here. There is actually a little bit of a change has happened since I put this chart together, because South Tyneside has dropped from a Labour majority to no overall control, because Labour only had a majority of 1 there, and that's dropped down to 27 councillors for them now. One's left the party. So look, aside from that, as you can see, it's all Labour majorities, and even those two, which is South Tyneside and Newcastle, which is there, Labour have the most number of councillors, so they are still the driving force on those councils. And even worse news for Labour is that of the 6 councils that we're looking at, which is Newcastle-upon-Tyne, Gateshead, North Tyneside, South Tyneside, Sunderland and Hartlepool, of those 6, 4 are having the whole council elected. Now, they wouldn't normally be doing that. Usually all 6 of these would be electing councillors by thirds, i.e. 1/3 of the councillors are up for election every year. But 4 of the 6 are having their ward boundaries changed, which means that every single councillor will be up for election, which is disastrous news for Labour up here in the North East, because as we'll get into, I think they're going to see huge drops in their vote share. And there is at least one of these councils, just based off the numbers that we had from the 2024 election, that I think, because of that reason, Reform will be able to flip from Labour majority control to Reform majority control. So stick around to find out which one that is. And of course, we've got some recent history that can go to show us that. This is the map of the electoral divisions for County Durham, which was, of course, elected in its entirety in May of this year. And Reform, as you can tell from the screen, won very convincingly. And the numbers that Reform put up were quite striking, because this was one of the areas of the country where Reform won very comfortably. They weren't these marginal sort of wins that we've kind of seen. If we look here, quite easily in a number of places, in excess of 50% of the vote. I apologise, the numbering on these charts here is not the greatest. I need to fix the formatting. But 59% of the vote in Stanley, 50.5% in Anfield Plain, 42% in Derwent, 61% in Craghead and Southmoor, 43%. So you can see in excess of 40% pretty much everywhere in those ones we've looked at. I've taken those ones as an example because they're bordering the areas that we're going to be looking at today in Gateshead. So look, there's previous from just this year of the Labour collapse in the North East, and Reform being the main beneficiary of that. So as we go over to our UK our wards for the North East, these are the wards for these councils, and these were last elected in their entirety in 2024. There's been a couple of by-elections in a few places since then, of course, but the full council election 2024 May last year. And you can see an awful lot of red, and this is what I mean. Really bad news that for Labour, that all of these, 4 of these councils are going to be up for entire council elections. And one of those is Newcastle-upon-Tyne itself. Now, look, we've spoken about Reform, and we will get on to Reform, but it would be remiss not to mention the Green Party in Newcastle-upon-Tyne. Now, look, Newcastle, big city, university town, student population. It's going to be an area where the Greens really punish Labour. And you can see there's already a couple of holdouts for them from 2024. They got 45% of the vote in Ellswick in 2024. They got, from South Jesmond, actually, they're ahead of the Liberal Democrats there by 3 points. They got 36.4% there. And in Byker, 57% of the vote. So they have these little areas already of very strong voting results for them. But there's others. Look, Monument, 24% of the vote they got in 2024. Labour got 57% of the vote. So a comfortable win for Labour, really. But look, my working theory going into these elections next year. Sorry for the jump cut. My dog heard someone having the temerity to move their bins in their back garden and went absolutely berserk. You might hear her huffing behind me as I continue speaking. I think I was saying when I was rudely interrupted that my working theory with Labour going into these elections next year is I think they're going to see at least 20-point declines in most wards. Now, there will be some where it's less. I think there'll be many more where it's greater than that. But about 20 points, and that's just based off the by-election videos that we've been doing on the Fridays every week. If you've been watching those videos, you'll know it's not surprising to see Labour decline 22 points, 23 points, 25 points. That is becoming a common feature. So let's apply that to this ward here. Labour dropped 20 points. That takes them down to 37%. With the Greens already on 24%, you'd expect them, in theory, to be the main beneficiaries of a Labour decline there. Well, they only have to increase by 13%, and they'll be at least level, if not slightly ahead of Labour already. So, here's one area where the Greens stand to gain off of the Labour Party. I think as well, the Liberal Democrats also are very much in with a shout. Look, here in 2024, they finished, just over 10 points behind Labour in Ousburn. Look, again, the Liberal Democrats, they have these little areas where they put up good numbers. And with Labour's decline that we're going to expect to see, you'd expect the Liberal Democrats will win this. Now, obviously, the Greens are lurking there about 20 points behind the Liberal Democrats. If they can get an explosive gain off of the collapsing Labour vote, maybe they could pip the Liberal Democrats, but I would back the Liberal Democrats there to finish ahead of Labour. I'm not entirely sure what's gone on in this ward because I can see it says there's 2 Lib Dem councillors and 1 Green. So it's quite possible there's been some mass defecting away from Labour since this election. But either way, they won this ward in 2024, Labour did, and almost certainly going to lose it in 2026. Outside of that, I think as we move across towards sort of the outskirts of Newcastle towards the western side, I think perhaps this is where Reform have a bit of a chance to come in and make some inroads. Look, the Conservatives here got 25% in 2024. We'll have to wait and see how well their vote holds up. I expect it won't hold up very, very well. So look, with Labour declining again, let's say 20% down, or 20 points down to 30% here. Tories down, let's say 10 points down to 15. Can Reform come through and capitalise and win with a 33, 34% vote share there? The Greens again lingering about on 15%. How much are they going to increase their vote in this ward as well? But I think that Reform will make inroads in Newcastle. Look, we don't tend to think of the cities as being Reform areas, but they are, as far as the nowcast goes, they are winning 2 out of the 3 Newcastle city constituencies for Parliament, as far as the nowcast projection goes. So look, don't write Reform off just because Newcastle is a city and it's a student town. I think those student areas obviously will go very heavily to the Green Party, but I think there is a lot of Reform support. The North East is going to fundamentally change in its outlook, in its how this map looks. And Reform are going to sweep through, would be my prediction, are going to sweep through this area quite phenomenally. So, look, I think it's going to be very surprising. There'll be a few surprises as to where Reform come through. Look, again, though, the Liberal Democrats as well, they have a presence on Newcastle Council as it is. And they stand to gain, they were just marginally behind Labour in Castle Ward here. I think Labour, in these marginal cases, face a wipeout pretty much. Where there's 3 councillors here. Again, it looks like one's probably left Labour to go independent. We've got 1 Labour, 1 Lib, 1 independent. Let's say again, Labour declined 20 points down to 20%. Lib Dems will probably increase theirs to close to 50 potentially. We'll have to, but again, don't write Reform off. How much of that Labour vote will go to Reform? I would still back the Liberal Democrats to win this ward, but Reform may well put up good numbers here. And so I think you're likely going to see maybe a ward with 3 Lib Dem councillors returned, or maybe 2 Libs and 1 Reform, depending on how well Reform are able to do. So, look, Newcastle-upon-Tyne already is no overall control. Labour have the most councillors on 38, but boy, oh boy, they're in so much trouble, and you just see their vote leaking from all directions. And that's been kind of the topic of a number of the videos I've done recently of these previews. But it's the same across the country. There are no areas of England or Scotland or Wales where Labour can comfortably predict that their vote's going to hold up. So look, that's kind of Newcastle City. We'll have to wait and see. And look, if you're from the northeast, by the way, I'd love to hear your input on this video. Please do get in the comments if you're from any of these areas. Let us know what it's like on the ground. What are people talking about? Are Reform going to come through and sort of turn this map largely red from red to turquoise or teal, whatever you want to call it? Let me know in the comments. We'll move across to the east from Newcastle into North Tyneside. So here, North Tyneside, Reform on the brain, clearly. Labour have a majority here. This is one of the ones where it clearly is a majority for Labour, performed very well in 2024. Now, you can see there's actually some Conservative holdouts here in 2024. They just marginally have managed to cling on to some of these constituencies. You can see they were quite marginal. That one quite comfortable, 52%, 61% in New York and Merton, and again, very marginal up there in St Mary's. Look, Labour's vote, again, I think is just going to disappear. I mean, the difference from sort of this time last year, looking to the May 2025 elections, it was all about the Conservatives because they were the ones defending most of these seats. What's happened since then and now is just Labour's vote share has disappeared. Nowhere does their vote share hold up well. And so even in these marginal areas where they didn't quite win in 2024, I expect to see them just disappear from the running. There was actually a strong independent presence here as well in 2024. They got 29% of the vote, so and won a seat. So, yeah, this is a very marginal constituency. Ward. Let's see, can Reform come through and take this one? But other than that, the other thing I noticed with North Tyneside was already a very strong Green presence. So they got 35% here in Whitley Bay North. Look, these are the ones that the Greens have got to win if they're going to make good on all this hype that's around them recently. Again, let's assume a Labour drop of 20 points down to 39 points. Well, then the Greens are only 5% behind just on their 2024 score. So these are the ones the Greens have got to win. They need to be getting about 45% of the vote in wards like this and taking all 3 seats, I think, for them to make really, to be considered as, serious. And for them, the 2026 goal has to be to be that thorn in Labour's side, deprive them of as many seats as possible. And these are the sorts of wards where they have to capitalise on that. Again, look, a convincing win for Labour in 2024, 66% of the vote. Greens, second place, yes, but obviously way behind, 50% behind. But look, don't write off these massive swings away from Labour. Now, I've said minimum 20%, 20-point reductions in Labour's score. Don't write off 30. I don't think that's going to be... I think that'll be something that we will see in certain areas. Because as we come down into other parts of North Tyneside, you'll see some of the numbers Labour put up are extraordinary. This is another 61, but there's some... Here you go, 70% for Labour in Howden. And Reform actually managing to put up decent numbers in 2024 as well. You say that's not decent numbers, it's 8%. Yeah, but remember, I've said this on a number of these preview videos now, and we'll see it again later in this video. Bear in mind, the 2nd of May 2024 is before the general election has been called in the UK. It's before Nigel Farage is back involved with politics. He's just a GB News host at this time. And Reform is polling probably about 8% maximum in the polls, averaging probably about 6%. So for them to be making the board on 8% in these elections in 2024, it's one of those areas where I'm going to be looking at, and there's going to be others later that are far more, than this, where Reform will do very well. So look, Labour, yes, got 70% in 2024. I expect to see that reduce to well below 50%, so at least a 20-point reduction. I wouldn't be surprised to see 25, 30-point reductions in areas like this. That's another 66. I'm trying to find one because I know there's one that's 80 here. There we go, 81% for Labour in Battle Hill. Reform didn't stand here, so we can't really make too much assumptions as to how well they might do. The Greens obviously got 9%, but did finish below the Tories. Again, look, maybe this is the sort of area that Labour might be able to cling on to seats because the gap is so large. There's an insulation there. But all I'm saying is just don't write off seeing massive vote share declines. Who knows? I don't want to say they're going to lose 50 points, but I also wouldn't write it off. Such is the decline in Labour's support. And indeed, just to finish up on North Tyneside, we have had, in fairly recent history, the 2nd of July this year, a by-election in North Tyneside, Killingworth, where Reform were able to get 38% of the vote and win, Labour in second place. So, look, I think therein lies the story of what's going to happen in 2026. Just Reform coming from nowhere a year ago, or 2 years ago, as it will be, from nowhere 2 years ago to winning these wards. And look, it spells doom for the Labour Party. And just to look at that by-election result that we were talking about, that Killingworth one, look, Labour down 22 points. And this is what I mean. I expect to see them decline at least 20 points. And that allowed Reform to come in from nowhere and get 38.5%. However, on the same day, Labour did manage to hold on to a ward. Again, down a little bit less, actually, 17 points. This is what I mean. Some will be less, but my theory is about 20-point reduction in most of these wards. They declined by 17 points there, and Reform were up by just under 20. So look, maybe some hope there in that Long Benton result that Labour can cling on to some of these seats, but I think in general it's going to be carnage for them. So then to move south of the Tyne into South Tyneside, a far more interesting and curious prospect, because as you might be able to see there, we're just looking at this area that starts here with this green ward and comes down to, well, this is Sunderland here, so it comes down to just above here. So you can see there's a lot of grey in there. Now, there's a very, very strong independent presence on South Tyneside Council. As you can see, they won on vote share terms a number of these wards, but looks like they only put up one councillor in each place. So, for example, Felgate and Hedworth, they beat Labour 46.6% of the vote, but only won one seat. Bolden and Colliery, they won with 46.8% of the vote, very marginal win, and they only got one seat because there's only one councillor put up, I assume. Primrose, there was three of them. They got 56% of the vote and won all three. Looks like here they put up more than one and they got two. But generally speaking, it seems like they put up one councillor, or they did put up more and only one was able to win. I don't know. I did put in all. I've looked at all these results because I put in the data manually myself, but I can't remember every council result that I put in. But also a very strong green presence here. You can see the Greens did very, very well in 2024. 47% there, almost 70% in Biddick and All Saints. West Park, they got 54%, and in Beacon and Bents, 68% of the vote. So a very, very strong green presence. And again, Reform is going to be the sort of spanner in the works. It's very difficult for us to tell how well they'll do in South Tyneside because they didn't stand here in 2024 and there hasn't been any by-elections. However, they are projected on the nowcast to win South Shields, but the Green Party are polling very, very well in South Shields as well. They're in second place on about 28% of the vote. So expect to see Green gains. The real spanner in the works here, to use the phrase again, is this independent thing, because how does that interact? Where do these guys stand? I had a look through their Facebook page because they do form the main opposition to Labour on this council, and all I can say is they're very anti-Labour. They do not like Labour. I assume they're probably former Labour voters who became disaffected and formed their own party, possibly former Labour councillors. I don't know. But they're very anti-Labour. But are they anti-Labour in the sense of how the Green Party are anti-Labour, or are they anti-Labour in the sense of how Reform are anti-Labour? And that would therefore inform our assumptions about how the election will go. But I think Reform will pick up a number of seats in South Tyneside. Just to look at the ones that Labour won, they got 54% of the vote in Whitburn and Marsden. But again, the Greens had a very strong presence here. So it's going to be a battle, really, between the Greens and Reform, I think, and then those independents as well. We'll see how they sort of, what they do. Because, look, I find the independents and the local alliance, or local alliances that form, they tend to be quite closely aligned to parties like Reform or like Greens, with the split being left-right, obviously, because they tend to be quite anti-establishment. And generally speaking, they form because of a dissatisfaction and a disaffection with the main parties, Labour or Conservative, and then these local things form from that. So when parties like Reform and the Greens come along and offer that anti-establishment vibe, sometimes these independents will do deals with these parties. So look, if you live in this area and you know more about it than I do, your comment will be invaluable. So let us know what you think is going to happen in South Tyneside. But look, I do think Reform will do very, very well. I think the Greens will do very well. It's going to be a bit of a battle, Green versus Reform. Maybe one of the best areas of the country where we see a proper tete-a-tete of Green versus Reform, which is a bit unique. But yeah, those independents do throw a spanner in the works. And look, the thing is, with these areas, if these were not so much that one, but maybe this one, if this was a ward where the independents only threw up one councillor to stand, look, if that had been Reform on 46% of the vote, there's a pretty good chance they may have won all 3 seats. So, Labour, if there's deals that go on or whatever it is, or Reform just come in and are able to beat the independents or take the independent vote away, and take some Labour vote, Labour could be facing a wipeout in South Tyneside, just based off the fact that they already lost a lot of these wards on vote share terms and only got a number of councillors, because it looks like the independents only put up one councillor in a number of these wards. So yeah, Greens will do very well. Reform will probably do very well. That'll be an interesting battleground to look at. Right, I noticed we're already on 24 minutes of me talking, so we'll move quickly on to Gateshead. And look, again, not too much. It's very difficult to say again, because it's another area where I'll just quickly mouse over a number of these wards so you can see the numbers, where Reform didn't stand in 2024. So again, we have no insight in real voting terms as to just how well Reform will do. But remember that those wards we looked at in County Durham were bordering to the south, just to the south of this constituency actually, those County Durham divisions where Reform are getting 50% plus of the vote. So I think in areas like maybe Chopwell and Rowlands Gill, where Labour got 71% of the vote, expect to see a huge vote share decline and Reform challenge, if not win, the ward. Again, 60% in Winlerton and High Spen, 54% for Labour in Crawcrook and Greenside. The Greens, again, with a presence here. Look, I think the Greens, as we've seen going through this, stand to have a pretty good evening, I think, up in the northeast. I think they may well be the second big winners after Reform. Wright and Crooked and Stella, Liberal Democrats going to be in with a shout there, if you consider a Labour decline of 20 points. Look, again, big Labour numbers in 2024, expecting to see big declines, and I do think Reform will do very well in Gateshead. There's no real evidence to go on that, but just, again, looking at the nowcast results, the nowcast projection for Westminster, Reform will win in the Gateshead constituencies, and looking at those 2025 divisions where Reform were able to get in excess of 50% of the vote, just, geographically very close to these wards in Gateshead, I think Reform will stand to do very well. And again, it's another one of these councils, as the only one we looked at so far is North Tyneside, where there won't be a full council being elected. So again, really staring down the barrel, Labour, when all of the councillors are up for election. I think they are facing pretty much extinction in the northeast, frankly, because of the fact that all these councils will be having a full election. So look, Gateshead, I think Reform will perform very, very well. Less scope for the Greens here, although we have seen there a couple of wards where they may well do well. I think the Liberal Democrats will probably pick up a few seats as well, but Reform I anticipate would be the big winners in Gateshead. Okay, right, we flew through Gateshead there. I'm sorry if you're a Gateshead resident, and for the other ones, I've spent too much time on the previous councils there, and my voice is going, so it's going to be a long video, and it's going to be when my voice gives out that I have to end, probably. So we go down into Sunderland, and again, we've had a recent history, very recent history, because it was only 3 or 4 weeks ago. At the end of November this year, Reform beat Labour, getting 46% of the vote in Hetton to beat Labour, who came in third place behind the independent candidate there as well. We covered this in a by-election video on that week. And look, again, I think this is the prognosis for the North East in general, frankly, but for Sunderland in particular. And Sunderland is one of these areas where we actually have some Reform numbers to work with. So I prefaced earlier about 2024 and the situation, the environment and Reform. So if you see them putting up numbers like 16% in 2024, these are the ones you want to watch for them to get way over 40% of the vote, I think, in 2026. You can see in a number of these wards, they were getting 13%, 15%, 15% again, 15% again. So they were getting quite consistently around 15% in Sunderland in a number of these wards. And I think these are the ones where Reform, they put up a candidate in every ward by the look of it in Sunderland. So they clearly were very bullish on Sunderland as far back as 2024. 22% they got in Southwick in 2024. Look, this is going to be a massive opportunity for Reform to win an entire council. I think 32% they got, only finishing less than 20%, 20 points behind Labour and Redhill Ward in 2024. Look, that's phenomenal, bearing in mind, like we said, 2024, they were, frankly, a nothing party. You know, they didn't really exist. They were very much a minor party, polling very low nationally. So for them to be putting up 32 in 2024, I think they will probably get in excess of 50% in Redhill in 2026 then. So I think, let me know if you agree with me, but I think this area for Reform, putting up these very strong numbers in 2024, I think they have the chance to just go obliterating through Sunderland in 2026 and to win a majority on this council. I think this may well be one that Reform are able to flip in its entirety. And there won't be as many of those in 2026 because of the fact that councils are elected by thirds or halves, which just reduces the opportunity for a new party with no councillors, or they've got one now, obviously, in Hetton, to flip a council. But I think this is the best example we've seen so far of Reform having the opportunity to flip a council. I do think they will perform well in a number of all these other councils we've looked at, but this one we have the numbers to go on from 2024, and we can see that already they were doing very, very well. So I think they'll post very strong numbers in Sunderland. I expect to see Sunderland probably go to Reform. So likewise, we'll go down to Hartlepool, and this again is another area where Reform put up candidates in 2024. And again, they were getting decent numbers for where they were polling at the time. 13% in Headland and Harbour, 12% in Hart, 21% in De Bruce. Finishing just behind, only 2% behind the Tories there. And there's been a by-election in Hartlepool as well. Throston, Reform, already have two councillors here via defections, and they won this by-election by a 10% margin over Labour as well, getting just under 50% of the vote. And this is what I mean. They are going to be pushing 50% of the vote in these council elections up in the northeast, particularly in Sunderland and Hartlepool. It's going to be a phenomenal change. Hartlepool is one of the ones that's not having a whole council election, so I think far less, or probably no chance, I haven't done the math, sorry, but probably no chance that Reform can flip this council, but they will have a very large presence on Hartlepool Council come May the 7th, 2026, after the votes have been counted. Again, Rossmere, they got 22% of the vote. Independent presence here as well. They got these two wards down in the south of Hartlepool, got 35% in Fens and Gratham, and Seaton they got almost 60% of the vote. So strong independent presence. A big Tory ward there, looks like probably a more rural area. Reform already have a defectee by the looks of it. Tories here got just under 50% of the vote, but again, Reform polled strongly given their numbers at the time of 13%. So I think Sunderland and Hartlepool there, to finish the video, are going to be seismic changes, and Sunderland in particular, because every council is up for election, expect to see that council flip Labour to Reform. And that brings us to the end of the North East 2026 preview. Sorry that we kind of flown through the last three councils there, but I noticed that this is already a half-hour long video, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. I do hope you enjoyed the video, guys. We've got a few more of these 2026 previews to get through. I'll try and throw them out at twice a week now that we've got no more by-elections to be looking at. And there'll be an end of year sort of review video, I think, that will come out as well in the coming week or two as well. So do get in the comments, as always. Let me know what you think. Let me know your and again, if you live in the northeast, your input will be crucial and vital to provide some context for the channel. So please do get involved in that way as well. If you haven't yet subscribed and you made it all the way to the end of the video, please do consider subscribing, hit the notification bell, and join this community. And if you could give us a like as well, that'd be most appreciated. Thank you, guys. I think this will probably be the last video that goes up before Christmas. So I'll say now, I did say in the by-election video, but I'm going to say it again anyway. I wish you all a very, very happy, joyful, blessed, and Christful Christmas. And I will see you all on the next video.